So we only have one real announcement before we begin this morning. Last night we had an amazing auction. Are there any, I'm hoping actually all of the auction team are home sleeping, but is there anyone from the auction team here today? Okay. It was so fun. And there was a video. Are there people who have not seen the video? Make sure that you reach out to Becky Heel to find out where you can see the video. Because I was not a believer, honestly, when we were doing it. I was like, oh my God, I don't know. It turned out amazing. And it was so funny. They showed it twice, and I loved it. It was hilarious. So please ask Becky to see if there's a way for us to show that again, because it was really, really fun. And I just enjoyed seeing you all. It was really lovely to be in that room together and just having a great time. I have been asked by the auction committee to let you know that the silent auction is still going. So there are still a few, there's like an hour left, so you can try to get on right after service. What's that? Yes, during the sermon. It's super boring, so just do it then. But really, it was just fun. I had a great time. So thank you all, especially the committee that put it together. With that, let us begin our worship today with our chalice lighting by Gregory Paley. And so we gather from the ebb and flow of our lives, thirsty for connection to ourselves, thirsty for connection to others, thirsty for connection to the larger life. As we light this chalice, may all who have gathered here be filled with joy and hope, filled with compassion and love. Here, may we be filled so that we may pour ourselves out into the world.
We That first step is a doozy. Good morning. I'm Debbie Bieber, for those of you who may not recognize me or know me. When Monica asked me to tell you why I give to First Church, I had to think for a minute. And I decided, in true UU fashion, that I needed to reframe the question. And the new question is, why do I give back to my church? I actually give to two churches, First Church here in Salt Lake and my home church in Pasadena, California. And I do so for all the normal reasons, but mostly to ensure that these churches continue to flourish and be here for me and you and future generations. Other denominations expect more from their members in terms of a monetary contribution. Generally, they speak in terms of a tithe, 10% of income. UUs don't do that. I've heard it said that we are just as generous, or even more so, but we give to multiple organizations. The Sierra Club, World Wildlife, Planned Parenthood, ACLU, on and on. So I had to ask myself, what are my priorities? And as a member of the consumer culture, what do I get back? So what do I get back from the Sierra Club and World Wildlife? I get a tote bag or a travel mug. But beyond that, once I've paid them, other than additional asks for more money, I don't really have a relationship with those organizations, and I don't hear from them again until it's time to renew at the end of that year. So what do I get from my church? So much more. Well, not the tote bag or the travel mug. I think I got a t-shirt once. But if you're like me, you have way more travel mugs in your kitchen cabinets than you will ever use. I get so much more from my church than I get from those other organizations. I know and support the mission and the purpose, like I do with those other organizations, but this is a community. I get theology that matches my own. You all are my people. I joined First Church in 2017 after retiring and moving here from Chicago. So I'm a newbie. I've only been around for about 5 years, and 2 of those we've been basically virtual. So I don't have the history with First Church that many of you probably do. But Neighborhood Unitarian Universalist Church in Pasadena was where my husband and I were married, where we raised our kids, where we held anniversary and holiday parties, where we held memorial services for both of my parents. At one point, there were 4 generations of my family attending that church. I spent time, talent, and treasure in service to Neighborhood Church, and have been and plan to continue to develop that same relationship, working side by side with the rest of this community. There's a relationship between the church and the members. The church will be here to meet my needs in times of trouble and in times of celebration. And I have an obligation to do the same for the church. I have a deeper sense of where my money is going. I can see the budget and voice my preferences. I'm kind of a budget person. I am getting to know the leadership, and I trust their judgment. And we have programs, lots and lots and lots of programs. Some I engage in, and some are not really my thing, but I can appreciate that they are there for others. And yes, giving makes me feel good. I always wish I could do more when thinking about my gifts, whether they be financial gifts or gifts of time and talent. I'm not looking at membership categories and thinking, what gift can I get at this level? We show up. I get personal thank yous, some spoken, some written, some in more subtle ways. I feel valued in this community. I give back to both of my churches for all the support and community that they have given and continue to give to me.
It's a big step. Now's the time for our offertory, and we have changed it up a little bit. We're not doing a typical plate anymore, just COVID and money and stuff, right? So what we've done is we've added these little cards into your first class seats with lots of leg room, right? And you'll see a little QR code right in the front, and you can scan that with your phone, and that will bring you to our Givelify page where you can help support the mission of this congregation. We've had a couple of new expenses that were just not in the budget, the air purifiers and some of the heaters that we're going to be using on the plaza. So if you can help us offset that, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you. On October 2nd, NASCAR driver Brandon Brown was being interviewed by NBC sports reporter Kelly Stavitz after winning in Talladega. But behind them rang a chorus of F. Joe Biden, only, you know, they weren't saying F. Stavitz, in an effort to deflect the slur, said that the crowd was chanting, "Let's go, Brandon." And members of the political right found this funny and quickly assumed the minced oath as their own and began sharing it widely. There was a song released. A Southwest airline pilot said it over the intercom. Florida Representative Bill Posey ended a speech on the House floor last month with the phrase. And this week, Mississippi State Senator Chris McDaniel tweeted a widely shared meme of deer scat that had been arranged to spell "Let's go, Brandon." I personally don't understand touching deer poop to own the libs, but it's become a powerful mimetic code that allows people to say F. Joe Biden wherever they please. And to be clear, I'm not one of those people who thinks that there were, good old days where politicians were civil to one another, right? Political discourse has always been acrimonious. But I have been alarmed by some of the rhetoric coming from certain GOP leaders. The level of rancor and vitriol is astonishing. And regardless of what the media might suggest when they say there's been a breakdown in public discourse, I don't think Democrats and Republicans share equal blame. There is something terribly wrong in the Republican Party these days, that appears to be not just ideological but cultish in its demonization of the other. But this is not actually a sermon about politics, not exactly. When the Let's Go Brandon phenomenon was unfolding, it actually got me thinking about Thanksgiving and how it's an opportunity to explore what really goes on when we argue. Some of you will be going home to loving families who all think similarly. Some of you will be sharing a tense table with varied political positions. Some of you will not go home, or you may be staring at an empty chair because it's no longer comfortable or safe to share the table. An argument happened, something broke down. There is a feeling that grips us when we're having an argument. Our minds are steaming, full speed ahead, synapses firing, thoughts coming to the fore, one after the other, and in the moment it can feel lucid. We can feel like we have centuries of philosophers at our aid. Everything is so clear. I am right, you are wrong. But the hangover we often have later suggests that something else is usually running the show. Homo sapiens is often translated as wise human or rational human, reasoning human. And scientists adorned us with this title, believing it was our ability to reason and engage rationally that differentiates us from other species of animals. Reason and rationality certainly do inform our behavior, but most often when we are calm, when we have time to weigh different positions, and especially when we have nothing invested in the outcome. At other times, we are much more emotional than rational. And I don't say this to diminish our capacities for reason, to downplay the truly fascinating aspects of self-knowing, nor do I wish to parrot the simple idealism and fantasy of those who would say that we are the same as every other species on the planet. On one level, of course, we are the same. On another level, we are vastly different. And our rational capacities have played a huge part in this. But the emotional side, perhaps the aspect of humanity we most desperately need to be aware of, is made invisible when we name ourselves Homo sapiens. Reasoning human, wise human. The strict scientists among us might insist on pointing out its chemical reactions that we have when we have these so-called emotions, right? Somehow categorizing them as under the influence of the rational and exploring mind. But this really doesn't help us in the moment, in the argument. The chemicals may be coursing through our bodies, but all we can see is, I am right. And more accurately, perhaps, all we can really see is I. And along with this I comes a plethora of projections that we foist on others. Well, clearly you wanted it this way. Otherwise, you wouldn't have let the kids wear those clothes out. Or you would have been home on time. Or you would have put more time into the project. Clearly you wanted to hurt me. There's something uniquely human in our belief that we can know what is going on in the minds and the behaviors of other people. We insist, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. And perhaps, we don't even know what's going on in our thinking because we haven't even checked in with our emotions. The emotion of anger is really quite simple. It burns in and burns out very quickly. The slow burn, the fuel that can keep anger hanging around for days and weeks and even years, is the fear and the shame that lie beneath it. Someone accuses you of doing something they see as wrong. There is anger. We can identify it. Our blood is hot. There is tension in our body. Our mind focuses intently on what or who is in front of us. The rush in our ears blocks everything else out. We know we are angry. More hidden are the feelings of fear and shame. Finding them, identifying them, is our work as spiritual beings on a journey. Fear and shame are the tender underbelly of that ever-elusive I. And they are the source of so many of the projections we put unfairly onto others. The difference between guilt and shame is one we don't often explore. People say things like, "Don't make me feel guilty." But at the heart of this phrase is a shame reaction. Guilt is for a specific thing we've done. We've washed our partner's favorite white shirt in our bright red towels. We've scraped somebody's car when we were trying to get somewhere too quickly. We shouldn't have done these things, but they don't make us bad people. However, when we stand in the face of an accusation, when we often have a hard time weighing the merits of whether we are or are not responsible, because we interpret the words coming at us as something we did. Not as something we did, but as something we are. And we are ashamed, or we are being shamed. And it's true that sometimes the people doing the accusation don't really help the situation because they are invested in their own projection. You did X, Y, Z because you are a bad person. And it's hard to not take that in a shameful way. But ultimately, right, we are responsible for our own shame reaction. And while, on certain occasions we might agree, I am a bad person, most often we know that we're not. Most often we know that we're not. And so instead of stopping to feel the shame rising inside of us and identifying what's happening, we instantly go to anger and we respond by saying, "No, you are a bad person." Fear can play its own role. At heart, we are community creatures. There are a few hermits among us, but for the most part, our lives are fulfilling only when we have others around us. And the argument threatens this. The conflict threatens this. It threatens to remove us from community, and therefore from the one aspect that actually gives our lives meaning. We hear things like, you have to love yourself first, from self-help books and speakers, but what is the context for this love? I understand the point of not living solely for others, but trying to love yourself outside of community makes no sense to me either. It's an impossible notion. It may make us feel good to say it, but it's not actually real. When we are accused, and even when we are accusing, there is a threat to community, a threat to relationship, a threat to the source of meaning in our lives. Often, after a particularly bad argument, we may lie awake at night. We may lie awake for weeks. We may feel nauseous and fragile, lethargic and depressed. These people may no longer be our friends or companions or acquaintances. When we begin to tell ourselves stories like, "I don't need them in my life anyway. They did nothing but make my life difficult. I can live without them." And yes, there are some people we should shed or avoid, partnering up with another alcoholic boyfriend or opening a business with someone who steals is not good decision-making. But the majority of the arguments we have are not these kinds of situations. They're with people who, like us, are fallible and human. and no more damaging than you or I. Even arguing with people we have just met can make us feel horrible, full of defensiveness, full of self-righteousness, because we are in conflict with a living being who could have been a friend. Now, I have sat scores of meditation retreats trying to break through my obsession, right? My obsession with my eye. But I also believe in community. And sitting on a cushion can sometimes, I think it's helpful, but sometimes it can reinforce the solitary nature of our thinking. You know, in the day-to-day life, 99% of our thoughts are self-referential. And when you're sitting on a cushion, it's no different, except that perhaps sometimes it's a little more intense because there's nothing to distract you from your own solipsistic thoughts. And so while I really believe in the benefits of meditation, I also believe that one of the best spiritual practices we can engage in on a regular basis is looking into the eyes of another person. Taking the time to really look into the eyes of another person. It's often quite uncomfortable, right? But you'll also notice how hard it is to argue with someone when you are really looking into the eyes of another human being. You can see when people are arguing, they are not witnessing the being in front of them, right? They are always kind of looking aside because they can't handle what's coming through, right? Our fear of loss, our shame of self is only too visible, as is theirs. And when we are looking into the eyes of another person, our anger loses much of its fuel because the I becomes enwrapped in a we. And several years ago, I had a particularly painful argument with a very close and long-term friend of mine. You know, a lot of time has passed since then, but I can still feel it vividly. I know exactly where I was. I can still see the whole thing. And I'll spare you the substance because you've all had your own painful arguments with friends, maybe even arguments with some of the people in this congregation or even this room, right? The more important the relationship, the more painful the argument is. And that's because something has happened. We have looked into each other's eyes. We have been seen. And now we fear not being seen or being seen as only one thing, a bad person. More than anything, I wanted to resolve this argument with my friend. I was getting a stomach ache from it, and you know, just it hurt. But let me tell you something. It was his fault, right? But I was afraid. I was afraid I wouldn't be forgiven, which only further made me insist I was right. And there was no shortage of projection I was casting over my friend, like a mantra in my head. Over and over again, I had conversations with him, reliving past ones, making up new ones. My fear and my shame were running the show, but all I could see was my anger. Either I was going to win or he was. Lost was the how are we going to win? Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers. You are the light of the world." Right? And I believe this. I also believe the Buddha, who said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." It is tough to be a peacemaker. It is tough to be a light unto the world, to make changes in the world when the arguments we are going to have in the future, not just the ones we're in right now, but the ones that are coming. But the arguments that we are going to have are still guided by fear and shame and a sense of I must win or you will. In 10 days, you will be experiencing Thanksgiving in some form or another. It will be with family or it won't be. It will be argumentative or it won't be. The holidays are wonderful and they are complicated. And much of how we will experience that holiday will depend on how we deal with the I that is appearing as we relate to our family and our friends. So I return to the message from last week, right? The Sunday devotion, what we are doing right now, right, is not the real thing. This is rehearsal. This is where we come to rehearse with one another. In this house of worship, we are able to work on building trust with one another. It's where we are able to look most authentically into one another's eyes, where we are able to ask ourselves if we are projecting our emotions onto others. And we begin here because it's easier than out there. We have received so much training in the rest of our lives on how to dismiss others. So let us use the Sunday devotion as rehearsal to learn how to trust others. With practice, being a lamp unto ourselves, we can see the control that fear and shame hold over us when we argue. Instead of acting on them, instead of projecting them onto the person in front of us, we can have compassion for ourselves and for them. Fear and shame are hard to deal with. But there is no fear and shame outside these walls that is somehow separate from our own. Solving what seems to be external begins with acknowledging what lies within our relationships first. The world is waiting for illumination. It is waiting for peacekeepers. May it begin with you. May it begin with us. Truly. Amen.
Sometimes in our lives we all have pain, we all have sorrow.
Source of life, God, my darling, inspire us as we walk out of this sacred rehearsal, as we look into the eyes of our fellow beings and see the worth and the dignity that is not earned, that is not held back, that just exists because they are alive. Awaken us to the interwovenness of all existence, the space beyond birth and death, the space beyond that I, the space beyond the projection of separation. And fill us with grace so that we might step outside the fear and the shame that hold us back and lean into the compassion that make us peacekeepers illuminating the world. Amen.